The people who have the least are often the ones who reveal the greatest hearts. Hunger had a way of changing how the world looked. It sharpened every cent drifting from a bakery window, made every passing meal feel like an impossible dream, and turned the smallest piece of bread into something more valuable than silver. Emily Carter understood that better than anyone. At 22, the quiet Omega had learned to survive on almost nothing. The little cottage she rented at the edge of Silver Forest Park barely kept out the autumn wind. Her work washing clothes for wealthier families earned just enough to pay rent, and most evenings ended with an empty stomach. Today had been worse than most. She had spent nearly 12 hours scrubbing heavy blankets beside the freezing creek, her hands red from the icy water, her shoulders aching beneath the weight of soaked fabric. Her employer had barely glanced at her before tossing 2 wrinkled dollar bills onto the porch and shutting the door without a thank you. It wasn't enough to buy a proper meal, but the old bakery owner near the town square had quietly sold her yesterday's last bread roll for a single $1. Emily held the warm paper bag close to her chest as she walked home beneath fading orange leaves. The smell alone made her stomach tighten. She hadn't eaten since sunrise. Every step reminded her how tired she was. Every heartbeat whispered that no one would blame her for thinking about herself just this once. As she turned onto the narrow street leading away from the market, she noticed an elderly woman sitting alone beside the old stone fountain. The stranger's gray coat hung loosely around thin shoulders, and her silver hair escaped beneath a faded scarf. She wasn't asking anyone for money. She wasn't calling for help. She simply watched people pass with quiet dignity while dozens of shoppers hurried around her as though she were invisible. Emily slowed her pace. She watched merchants carrying overflowing baskets. Young alphas laughed as they walked by with steaming meat pies. Elegant ladies crossed the square without sparing the old woman a glance. No one stopped. No one even smiled. The elderly woman's eyes remained fixed on the paper bag in Emily's hands, but she quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own hunger. That single movement broke something inside Emily's heart. She knew that look. It was the silent look of someone pretending they weren't hungry because pride was the last thing they still owned. Emily glanced down at the bread. Her fingers tightened around the bag. She could already imagine tearing off the first bite the moment she reached home. Instead, she walked toward the fountain and knelt beside the woman with a gentle smile. "I don't have much," she said softly, placing the paper bag into the woman's trembling hands. "Actually, this is everything I have today. But food always tastes better when someone cares enough to share it." The old woman's surprised eyes shimmered in the afternoon light. "Child," she whispered, "what about you?" Emily simply shrugged with the kind of peaceful smile that only truly kind people carried. "Tomorrow will come. Somehow it always does." She stood before the woman could protest, offered one small wave, and continued down the quiet street with empty hands but a strangely lighter heart. She never looked back. If she had, she would have seen the elderly woman slowly rise to her feet with perfect strength. She would have seen the kindness disappear from weary eyes, replaced by calm authority. And she would have seen 12 silent figures dressed in dark cloaks emerge from the surrounding streets before bowing their heads with absolute respect to the woman everyone else believed was nothing more than a forgotten beggar. Emily Carter disappeared into the winding streets without realizing that every quiet step she took was changing the course of lives far beyond her own. The cool evening breeze carried fallen leaves across the empty square as the elderly woman remained perfectly still, her weathered hands resting on the simple paper bag. For several long moments, she looked down at the bread as though it were the most precious gift she had ever received. Then the peaceful silence shifted. 12 figures emerged almost soundlessly from different corners of the marketplace. They wore dark traveling cloaks instead of ceremonial uniforms, but the silver wolf crest embroidered inside each sleeve revealed an authority few people in the kingdom had ever witnessed. One after another, they lowered their heads in respectful silence. None dared speak first. The elderly woman slowly removed the faded scarf from her silver hair. The wrinkles of exhaustion remained, but the gentle uncertainty vanished from her expression, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone born to command. Her pale blue eyes reflected decades of wisdom and countless difficult decisions. She was Evelyn Blackwood, Queen Mother of the Northern Territories, widow of the late Alpha King and the only person whose words could still silence an entire royal council with a single sentence. The captain of her shadow guard stepped forward and bowed even lower. Your Majesty, forgive us. We should never have allowed you to wander through the town alone. Evelyn lifted one hand, stopping his apology before it continued. If you had followed more closely, she would have seen you. The captain nodded immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. Her gaze remained fixed on the direction where Emily had disappeared. Did every merchant pass me without stopping? Yes, Your Majesty. Did every noble family ignore me? Yes, Your Majesty. And that young Omega? The captain smiled faintly despite years of disciplined restraint. She offered you the only food she possessed. Evelyn carefully opened the paper bag. The bread was still warm from the bakery oven. She gently broke off a small piece and held it thoughtfully before speaking again. Do you know what is remarkable about true kindness? No one answered. She continued softly, almost speaking to herself. It never asks who deserves it. The square fell silent once more. Nearby, a pair of children chased one another across the cobblestones, laughing without any idea that royalty stood only yards away. Evelyn watched them for a moment before turning back to her guards. Find the records on Emily Carter. The captain hesitated only briefly. Would you like us to bring her to the palace? No. Evelyn's answer came immediately. If kindness is summoned by power, it is no longer kindness. Want to know who she is when no one is watching? Another guard stepped forward. Should we reveal your identity if she crosses paths with you again? Evelyn smiled gently as she looked once more at the bread in her hands. Absolutely not. Her voice carried warmth that surprised even those who had served beside her for decades. The greatest hearts shine brightest when they believe no reward is coming. She folded the paper bag with extraordinary care, almost as though it held a priceless treasure instead of a simple loaf. High above the marketplace, the first stars began to appear beyond the fading sunset. Somewhere beyond the northern mountains, her son, Alpha King Damian Blackwood, was leading his warriors home after months away protecting the kingdom's borders. He believed his mother had remained safely inside the royal palace. He had no idea she had spent the past several weeks traveling through villages disguised as an ordinary beggar, searching not for wealth, beauty, or noble blood, but for something far more difficult to find. As Evelyn quietly entered the waiting carriage hidden beyond the marketplace, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and whispered with quiet certainty, "Perhaps, after all these years, I have finally found the woman worthy of standing beside my son." The following morning arrived wrapped in pale golden sunlight, but nothing about Emily Carter's life felt brighter. She woke before dawn as she always did, pulled on the same faded blue dress she had carefully mended more times than she could remember, and stepped into the chilly morning air carrying an empty basket toward the creek. The water was colder than the day before, stinging her hands as she scrubbed shirts, blankets, and tablecloths belonging to families who rarely remembered her name. Hours passed beneath a clear autumn sky while laughter drifted from nearby homes where breakfast tables overflowed with fresh eggs, butter, and warm biscuits. Emily smiled whenever someone greeted her, even when the greeting was little more than polite obligation. She had long ago accepted that kindness was easier to give than to receive. By late afternoon she returned to town carrying neatly folded laundry balanced carefully inside her basket. As she approached the merchant district, familiar voices reached her before familiar faces did. 3 young women stood outside the bakery wearing elegant dresses trimmed with embroidered silver thread. They belonged to influential families within Silver Forest Pack, and every one of them noticed Emily at exactly the same moment. Clara Whitmore folded her arms with an amused smile. There she is, the generous little Omega. The others laughed immediately. Madison Ellis tilted her head. I heard she gave away her dinner yesterday. Emily stopped politely. Good afternoon. Clara ignored the greeting. Tell me something. Did the old beggar at least thank you before you gave away the only thing you owned? Emily nodded softly. She did not have to thank me. Another burst of laughter echoed across the street. Of course she did not, Madison replied. She probably fooled you just like every other beggar in town. Emily simply adjusted the basket in her arms. Maybe she needed it more than I did. Clara shook her head as though she could not understand such thinking. That is exactly why everyone takes advantage of you. You never learn. Before Emily could answer, the bakery owner stepped outside carrying a tray of fresh bread. The delicious aroma filled the street. Clara purchased 2 large loaves without hesitation and deliberately handed one to a stray dog wandering near the sidewalk while keeping her eyes fixed on Emily. See? If I want to waste bread, at least I choose a better investment. The women laughed again before walking away. Emily watched the dog happily carry the loaf down the street. Instead of feeling embarrassed, she quietly smiled. At least someone would not go hungry tonight. She resumed walking, unaware that from the second-floor window of the tailor shop across the street, an elderly woman wearing ordinary traveling clothes observed every moment in complete silence. Evelyn Blackwood lowered the curtain after watching the exchange from beginning to end. Beside her stood the captain of the shadow guard, waiting patiently for instructions. "Did you hear resentment in her voice?" Evelyn asked. "No, Your Majesty." "Did you see anger?" "No, Your Majesty." Evelyn looked thoughtfully toward the busy street below where Emily disappeared into the crowd carrying nothing except clean laundry and quiet dignity. "Interesting," she murmured. "Most people remain kind only until kindness becomes expensive." The captain nodded respectfully. She never asked anyone to notice what she sacrificed. Evelyn smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. "Exactly. Which means her compassion is not performance. It is character." She turned away from the window and reached for a small leather notebook resting on the table. Opening it carefully, she wrote a single sentence beneath Emily Carter's name. "She gives without expecting gratitude, even when the world answers her generosity with ridicule." Closing the notebook, Evelyn looked toward the distant northern road stretching beyond the town gates. Somewhere beyond those hills, her son was already making his journey home. Soon, fate would arrange a meeting neither of them expected. But before that day arrived, the Queen Mother intended to discover one final truth. Was Emily Carter simply kind when life was ordinary, or would her heart remain just as gentle when compassion demanded something even greater than a single loaf of bread? The next 3 days passed with quiet rhythm, yet Emily Carter never realized that every ordinary moment had become part of an extraordinary examination. She believed life had simply returned to normal. Each morning she carried baskets of laundry through the narrow streets of Silver Forest Park. Each afternoon she walked home beneath towering maple trees whose crimson leaves drifted lazily through the cool autumn air. Yet unseen eyes followed her gentle footsteps wherever she went. Queen Mother Evelyn Blackwood never approached Emily the same way twice. Sometimes she appeared as the elderly traveler Emily had already met. Other times she wore the plain clothes of a village widow, blending easily into crowded marketplaces where no one paid attention to another unfamiliar face. On one chilly morning, Evelyn watched from across the town square as a little boy accidentally dropped a basket filled with fresh apples. The fruit rolled in every direction, bouncing across the cobblestones while busy shoppers stepped around them without slowing down. The child looked ready to cry. Before anyone else reacted, Emily quietly set down her own heavy basket of laundry and hurried over. She knelt beside the frightened boy, gathering each apple one by one, brushing away dirt before placing them carefully back into the basket. When the grateful child offered her one of the apples, Emily smiled warmly and shook her head. "Your family bought these for dinner," she said softly. "They belong with you." She picked up her own basket again and continued on her way without waiting for thanks. The following afternoon another opportunity arrived. A gray-haired stable worker struggled to push a broken wooden cart through thick mud after one wheel became stuck beside the road. Several strong young alphas passed him without stopping, too busy discussing the upcoming celebration for the Alpha King's return. Emily paused only long enough to place her own belongings safely beneath a nearby tree before helping the old man free the heavy cart. By the time the wheels finally rolled forward again, her dress was stained with mud and her hands were covered with dirt. The stable worker apologized for delaying her, but Emily simply laughed. Clothes can always be washed again. Hidden behind the stable doors, Evelyn watched every second without speaking. That evening she quietly added another sentence to the small leather notebook she carried everywhere. "She serves people she will never meet again with the same kindness she would offer family." On the 4th day, Evelyn arranged one final test. One of her trusted attendants disguised herself as a traveling merchant whose wagon had lost a small pouch filled with silver coins near the edge of town. The pouch rested plainly beside the road where dozens of people passed throughout the morning. Emily noticed it while carrying folded linens toward another customer's home. She picked it up, looked around for several moments, then hurried from shop to shop asking whether anyone had misplaced something important. Nearly an hour later she found the anxious merchant searching the roadside. Relief filled the woman's face as Emily returned the pouch without even opening it. "Please count everything," Emily insisted with a gentle smile. "I wanted to be certain it reached the right person." The disguised attendant thanked her repeatedly before returning to report everything she had witnessed. That evening Evelyn stood alone beneath the golden glow of sunset outside the modest inn where she had quietly stayed during her travels. The captain of the shadow guard approached respectfully. "Your Majesty," he asked, "have you found what you came searching for?" Evelyn closed her notebook and gazed toward the peaceful town where Emily walked home completely unaware that her character had been measured more carefully than any noble lady in the kingdom. A quiet smile touched Evelyn's lips. "No," she answered thoughtfully. "I found far more than I expected." She looked toward the northern road stretching beyond the hills, where dust from approaching riders had just begun to rise against the fading sky. "Now," she whispered with calm certainty, "it is time for my son to meet the woman who never needed a crown to live like a queen." The riders reached Blackwood Palace just before sunset, their horses carrying the dust of distant borders across polished stone courtyards that had stood for generations. Alpha King Damien Blackwood dismounted without ceremony, handing the reins to a waiting stable master before climbing the broad staircase leading toward the royal residence. Months spent protecting the northern frontier had left his dark coat weathered by wind and rain, but nothing about his calm expression suggested exhaustion. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a leader who had earned loyalty rather than demanded it. Palace servants bowed respectfully as he passed, yet Damien barely noticed them. His first destination was always the same. His mother's private sitting room overlooked the royal gardens where golden maple trees swayed gently beneath the evening breeze. He found Queen Mother Evelyn exactly where he expected, enjoying a cup of hot tea beside the open windows as though she had been waiting for this conversation all along. A warm smile crossed her face. "Welcome home, my son." Damien embraced her gently before taking the chair across from hers. "I received your message halfway through the journey." His silver eyes studied her carefully. "You said you found someone interesting." Evelyn poured another cup of tea before answering. "Not interesting." She slid the steaming cup toward him. "Remarkable." Damien smiled politely. "Mother, you have introduced me to remarkable people before. And every one of them disappointed you." He could not deny it. During the past 4 years, respected alpha families had proudly presented daughters known for beauty, wealth, intelligence, and impeccable manners. Noble houses competed for the honor of becoming connected to the royal bloodline. Damien had declined every proposal. Some admired the throne more than the man. Others sought influence disguised as affection. None had convinced him that genuine goodness still existed beneath polished appearances. Evelyn watched her son quietly before speaking again. "Tell me something honestly. What do you believe makes a future queen?" Damien answered without hesitation. "Someone who protects people before protecting her pride." Evelyn nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Good. Then perhaps we finally agree." Damien looked at her curiously. "Who is she?" Evelyn leaned back comfortably. "Her name is Emily Carter." Damien searched his memory. "That family does not belong to the noble registry." "No. Is she the daughter of a respected alpha?" Evelyn smiled softly. "She is an omega." Damien remained silent. His mother continued before he could respond. "She owns almost nothing. She spends her days washing clothes beside a creek. Most people overlook her before they even learn her name." Damien raised one eyebrow. "Then why are you smiling?" Evelyn slowly reached into her pocket and placed a carefully folded paper bag onto the table between them. It looked plain, slightly worn, and entirely out of place inside the elegant sitting room. Damien glanced at it with confusion. "What is this?" "The greatest gift I have received in years." She unfolded the paper carefully until the faint scent of fresh bread still lingered within its creases. Then she told him everything. She described the crowded marketplace, the hungry old beggar no one acknowledged, the final loaf of bread, and the quiet young woman who chose another person's empty stomach over her own without expecting recognition. She spoke of the frightened child, the struggling stable worker, the lost pouch of silver, and every unseen act of compassion that followed. Damien listened without interrupting. As the story unfolded, his expression slowly changed from polite curiosity to thoughtful silence. When Evelyn finally finished, the room remained peaceful except for the soft rustling of leaves beyond the open windows. After a long pause, Damien looked at the folded paper bag resting between them. "You tested her." Evelyn met his eyes calmly. "I observed her." Another silence settled over the room. At last Damien lifted the empty paper bag with unexpected care, running his fingers across its simple surface before looking toward the fading sunset beyond the gardens. "If she is exactly as you describe," he said quietly, "then I would rather meet her before she ever learns who I am. I want to see the woman your stories cannot possibly capture." The following afternoon a gentle rain drifted across Silver Forest Park, covering the winding streets with a silver mist that softened every rooftop and turned the forest beyond the village into a sea of fading autumn colors. Emily Carter pulled the hood of her worn blue cloak over her head as she hurried toward the old chapel carrying a basket filled with freshly washed blankets. Rain never bothered her. If anything, she welcomed it. The quiet sound of falling drops made the world seem gentler, washing away the hurried voices that usually filled the marketplace. She had just crossed the small wooden bridge leading toward the chapel when she noticed a young man standing beneath an enormous oak tree. His dark traveling coat was damp from the rain, and although he appeared perfectly capable of finding shelter, he remained where he was, studying the village with calm curiosity. He looked like an ordinary traveler, perhaps a ranger returning from distant roads, yet something about him felt strangely different. It was not his clothing or the way he carried himself. It was the quiet confidence in his eyes, the kind that did not seek attention because it had never needed it. Damien Blackwood had left the palace before sunrise wearing simple traveling clothes, determined to meet Emily without the weight of his title standing between them. Only 2 shadow guards watched from a distance, hidden well beyond sight, under strict orders not to interfere unless absolutely necessary. He had expected to observe quietly before introducing himself. Fate, however, had arranged something else. A frightened little girl suddenly appeared from the opposite side of the bridge, crying as she searched the muddy road. Her tiny knitted rabbit had fallen into the shallow stream below after slipping from her hands. She leaned over the railing, stretching as far as she could reach, but the toy floated just beyond her fingertips. Several adults walked past without stopping, eager to escape the rain. Emily immediately placed her basket beneath the tree and hurried toward the child. "Do not worry," she said gently, kneeling beside her. "We will get your friend back." Without hesitation, she found a long fallen branch resting beside the bridge and carefully reached toward the floating rabbit until the current slowly carried it within reach. Moments later she lifted the soaked toy from the water, brushed away a few wet leaves, and placed it carefully into the little girl's hands. Tears disappeared from the child's face almost instantly, replaced by the brightest smile Damien had seen in months. "Thank you," the little girl whispered before running into her mother's waiting arms. Emily smiled as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She simply returned to her basket and noticed the stranger still standing beneath the oak tree. "You have been standing in the rain this whole time," she said with quiet concern. "Are you waiting for someone?" Damien offered a small smile. "Perhaps." Emily looked around before opening her basket. One thick wool blanket rested neatly folded on top. She lifted it carefully and held it toward him. "You look cold. I have to deliver this, but the chapel is only across the road. You can borrow it until we get there." Damien blinked in surprise. "If I take it, you will be soaked instead." Emily laughed softly. "Rain dries. Kindness lasts longer." For one suspended heartbeat, the world seemed to fall completely silent. The steady rain faded into the background. Damien felt something ancient stir quietly inside his wolf, not with the overwhelming force described in old legends, but with a calm certainty unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not desire. It was recognition. As Emily walked beside him toward the chapel, speaking casually about the weather and asking whether he had traveled far, Damien realized she had not asked his family name, his occupation, or whether he possessed wealth. She simply treated a stranger with the same warmth she offered everyone else. Hidden beyond the trees, two shadow guards exchanged astonished glances as they watched their alpha king smile with genuine ease for the first time in many years, while Damien himself quietly wondered how a woman the kingdom barely noticed had somehow become impossible for him to overlook. The morning after the rain, Silver Forest Pack buzzed with unusual excitement. Colorful banners fluttered above the town square as merchants prepared for the annual harvest market, the one day each season when families from neighboring villages gathered to trade, celebrate, and welcome distinguished visitors. Emily Carter arrived early carrying a basket of neatly folded linens promised to several customers. She enjoyed market days not because she could afford much, but because laughter always seemed easier to find when children filled the streets with bright smiles and musicians played cheerful melodies near the fountain. She had almost finished her deliveries when she noticed a small crowd forming outside the jeweler's shop. Curious whispers spread quickly through the square. Someone stole Lady Clara Whitmore's family brooch. It disappeared only minutes ago. Everyone who walked through the shop should stay nearby. Emily slowed her pace, hoping the missing keepsake would be found quickly. Before she could continue, Clara stepped out of the store with an expression that blended frustration and confidence. Her sharp eyes swept across the gathering until they landed on Emily. A slow smile appeared. "How convenient," Clara said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You were standing closest to the display before the brooch disappeared." Emily blinked in surprise. "I was delivering laundry to Mrs. Dawson next door." "Perhaps," Clara replied smoothly. "Or perhaps you noticed something worth more than a week's wages." Several people exchanged uncertain glances. No one accused Emily directly, yet no one defended her either. The silence hurt far more than raised voices ever could. The jeweler stepped outside holding an empty velvet box. "The brooch was here less than 10 minutes ago." Clara folded her arms. Then surely no one would mind if baskets were checked. One by one, shoppers willingly opened their bags. Emily quietly placed her own basket on the ground and lifted the folded linen so everyone could see inside. Freshly washed blankets, shirts, and tablecloths filled every corner. Nothing else. Clara frowned, though only for a moment. Perhaps she hid it elsewhere. Emily looked at her calmly. "I did not take your brooch." "Then you have nothing to fear from questions." More people gathered around the square. Some remembered Emily's gentle nature. Yet uncertainty has a way of making ordinary people hesitate. Damien Blackwood stood near a produce stand wearing the same simple traveling clothes as the day before. Hidden among the crowd, he had come hoping to observe Emily once more before revealing anything about himself. Instead, he watched the entire exchange unfold. What caught his attention was not the accusation itself. It was Emily's response. She did not argue. She did not grow angry. She simply stood with quiet dignity, answering every question honestly while offering respect even to those who doubted her. The elderly jeweler suddenly rubbed his forehead with embarrassment. "Wait." He disappeared inside the shop for several moments before returning with a sheepish expression and something glittering in his hand. "Lady Clara, I owe everyone an apology." He held up the silver brooch. "I wrapped it inside the protective cloth before cleaning the display. I forgot I had done so." A wave of relieved murmurs spread through the square. Clara forced an awkward smile but said nothing. Emily simply picked up her basket. "I am glad it was found," she said sincerely. She turned to leave without asking for an apology or demanding that anyone admit they had judged her unfairly. Damien watched her walk away through the busy marketplace, sunlight dancing across her blue cloak as though the morning itself refused to let bitterness follow her. Nearby, one of the hidden shadow guards quietly approached him. "Your Majesty," he whispered carefully, "shall we step forward now?" Damien kept his eyes on Emily until she disappeared beyond the crowd. A thoughtful smile touched his face. "Not yet." His voice carried complete certainty. The truth always reveals itself without force. And today she proved something even my mother could not have shown me. Grace is strongest when no one believes you deserve it. Emily had nearly reached the quiet road leading away from the marketplace when the deep sound of a ceremonial horn echoed across Silver Forest Pack. Conversations stopped. Merchants lowered their banners. Children ran toward the center of the square as dozens of royal guards in polished dark uniforms entered through the eastern gate in perfect formation. The atmosphere changed instantly. Every resident understood what the royal crest embroidered on those cloaks meant. The Alpha King had officially arrived. Emily stepped aside with everyone else, lowering her eyes respectfully as the procession approached. She had no reason to remain. Royal ceremonies belonged to people far above her station. She turned to leave quietly, but before she had taken more than 2 steps, a calm, familiar voice carried across the square. "Please wait." Emily looked back in surprise. The elderly woman she had once believed was a homeless traveler slowly stepped forward from the royal carriage. She no longer wore a faded gray coat or a weathered scarf. Instead, an elegant midnight blue gown shimmered beneath a silver cloak fastened with the royal crest of Blackwood. Her silver hair was carefully arranged, and quiet authority surrounded her like sunlight breaking through morning clouds. A ripple of astonishment swept through the crowd. Clara Whitmore's face lost every trace of confidence. The jeweler nearly dropped his spectacles. One after another, people bowed deeply. "Her Majesty," whispered dozens of voices at once. Emily remained completely frozen. Her heart raced as memories flooded back. The loaf of bread. The trembling hands. The lonely woman beside the fountain. Evelyn Blackwood smiled warmly as she walked directly toward her. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "thank you for waiting." Emily struggled to find words. Your Majesty. I did not know." Evelyn softly touched Emily's hands before she could finish. "I know." She turned to face the gathering crowd. Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried effortlessly across the silent square. "Several days ago, while traveling through your town disguised as an ordinary beggar, I sat beside your fountain for hours." Curious murmurs spread through the marketplace. Evelyn continued. "Hundreds of people passed me. Many looked away. Some pretended not to see me at all. They were not cruel. They were simply too busy to notice." Her eyes found Emily again. Then one young woman stopped. She owned only a single loaf of bread. It was the only meal she had after a long day of work. Emily lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the attention. Evelyn's smile grew even warmer. "She placed that bread into my hands without asking my name, without wondering whether I could repay her, and without expecting anyone would ever know." Complete silence settled over the square. Clara stared at Emily with widening eyes. The same neighbors who had questioned her honesty only minutes earlier now exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn reached into the small leather satchel hanging from her arm and carefully unfolded the familiar paper bag she had preserved since that day. Though simple and slightly worn, she held it with the same care others might reserve for a priceless treasure. "This," she said softly, lifting it for everyone to see, "is the most valuable gift I have received in many years. Not because of the bread that was inside it, but because it was offered with a heart that expected nothing in return." At that moment, another figure stepped forward from the royal procession. Emily recognized him immediately. It was the quiet traveler she had met beneath the oak tree, the man to whom she had offered a blanket during the rain. Yet today he wore a tailored black ceremonial coat trimmed with silver, and every royal guard lowered their heads the instant he appeared. Damien Blackwood stopped beside his mother, his silver eyes never leaving Emily. A wave of stunned realization swept through her. The stranger she had treated with simple kindness had never been an ordinary traveler. He was the Alpha King himself. Damien offered her the same gentle smile she remembered from the rainy afternoon. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "my mother was right. Some treasures can only be found by those willing to look beyond appearances. And I believe I have just found the rarest one of all." For a long moment no one in the marketplace spoke. The autumn breeze carried golden leaves across the cobblestones as every eye remained fixed on Emily Carter. She wished the ground would somehow open beneath her feet, because she had never wanted attention. She had only wanted to help someone she believed was hungry. Damien Blackwood stepped closer, not with the distant confidence of a king demanding admiration, but with the quiet respect of a man approaching someone whose character had already earned his trust. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "my mother spent weeks searching for someone worthy of this kingdom's future. She never searched for perfection. She searched for compassion." Emily looked at him with uncertainty shining in her eyes. Your Majesty, I only shared some bread. Damien smiled warmly. No. You shared hope. The words settled over the silent crowd more powerfully than any royal decree. Evelyn stood proudly beside her son, her eyes reflecting both wisdom and quiet joy. Many people believe greatness begins with power, she said. They are mistaken. Greatness begins with the decision to care for another person when no one is watching. She turned toward the gathered townspeople. During my journey I met merchants with overflowing tables, nobles with beautiful homes, and travelers carrying heavy purses. Yet the richest gift came from the one person who possessed almost nothing. Clara Whitmore slowly lowered her head, shame replacing the confidence she had carried only hours earlier. The jeweler stepped forward as well. Miss Carter, he said sincerely, I judged you too quickly. Please accept my apology. Emily offered the same gentle smile she had always carried. There is nothing to forgive. Her answer surprised everyone once again. She had every reason to remember their doubts, yet she chose peace instead of resentment. Damien noticed the quiet strength behind those simple words. In that moment he understood why his mother had protected the folded paper bag like a priceless treasure. It had never been about bread. It had been about the heart willing to let go of its last comfort so another person would not face the night alone. Damien carefully removed the silver wolf crest fastened to his ceremonial cloak. It was the symbol every citizen recognized, representing the trust of the royal family rather than authority alone. He held it toward Emily with both hands. This is not a proposal, he said softly. Trust cannot be rushed, and respect cannot be commanded. I ask only one thing. Will you allow me the opportunity to know you as the remarkable woman you already are? Emily looked at the crest before meeting his eyes. She saw no pride, no expectation, and no demand hidden within his expression. Only sincerity. After a quiet moment she nodded gently. I would like that. Warm smiles spread across faces throughout the marketplace. Even the children seemed to sense that something unforgettable had just begun. Evelyn closed the folded paper bag one final time before placing it into Emily's hands. Keep this, she said. Whenever you doubt your own worth, remember that the smallest act of kindness can change the destiny of an entire kingdom. Church bells began to ring across Silver Forest Park as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, bathing the square in soft golden light. Emily looked around at the familiar streets that had once made her feel invisible. Nothing about the town had changed, yet everything felt different. She was not honored because she had become important. She had become important because she had never stopped treating other people as if they already were. And as Damien walked beside her through the marketplace, not ahead of her and never behind her, the people who witnessed that quiet moment understood a truth they would tell their children for generations. Crowns may inherit kingdoms, but only kindness earns hearts.